Are you good at finding records, but perhaps struggle a bit putting the pieces of information together to tell a fuller picture of your ancestor's story? Well, in today's video, I'm going to introduce you to my second great grandfather, and we're going to use census records, city directories, and newspaper ads to help do that. I wanted to find out more about his occupation, so I decided to combine record sets to tell a fuller picture of his story. Hi, I'm Grace Stabley, and I'm a professional genealogist. I love learning by watching how other people do genealogy. I hope you do too, because I like to make genealogy feel doable. So let's get started. This is Frederick W. Stabley. He is my second great grandfather. He was born in early 1850 and he died in 1932, born and raised and lived his entire life in York County, Pennsylvania. And like all of my ancestors, I like to try and find them in every census record that I can. Of course, census records are only every 10 years, so there's a lot of in between that I want to find out too. But those census records are a good way to get started. And I did just that. So here's an example. In 1870, Frederick was a 20-year-old and he was living at home with his father, George, and his mom, Eliza. Of course, in 1870, relationships weren't included yet. So I did find out later that those were indeed his parents. But look at his occupation. He was just listed as a carpenter. And I wanted to find out more about him. I wanted to see if I could find out what kind of carpenter he was. So, because census records are only every 10 years, I decided to go look at city directories. Now, both Ancestry and MyHeritage have wonderful city directory collections. This is at Ancestry. And we're starting here with the 1894 city directory out of York County, Pennsylvania. And here is Frederick Stabley listed. Again, just that generic term, carpenter. He lived at 329 West North Street in York County. And also notice right above him is Eli Stabley. That's my great grandfather. And he was a cigar packer and he lived at home with Frederick. So I tried to find as many city directory entries as I could, and I actually found quite a lot. This is a table that I made for a blog that I wrote about this exact subject. And I put all the information in a table, which is a wonderful way to pull all your information together and have it in one spot so I can easily analyze it and see what's going on. So in 1894, he did live at 329 West North Street. And he continued to live there until 1904, where he moved to 286 Cottage Hill, and then he eventually moved to 319 Garfield Street, which is where he died. Now, if I had only looked at census record, I would have missed that move to 286 Cottage Hill Avenue. And that information may or may not be important, but at least I have it and I can go on Zillow or Google Maps and I can see what that house looked like if it's still standing. But it's a little additional information for his life. The 1910 census actually did tell me that he worked for the Spring Harrow Company. And I thought, well, that's odd. He's a carpenter. I was thinking just the traditional sense of what a carpenter would be. But I found out through newspaper ads and by Googling these companies that he actually did work and he made farming equipment. So in 1917, the city directory showed me that he was an assemblyman for the Hench and Dromgold Company. And here was an ad I found for them. And they made spring tooth harrows, which was a kind of agricultural cultivator. And all back then, everything was made of wood. So that would make sense that he was a carpenter. But he did make farming equipment. So that helped me understand a little bit more about the work that he did. In 1919 and 1921, I found him in city directories working for the Flinchbaugh Machine Company. And then later in the 1920s, he worked as a woodworker or a bench hand for a company called Frederick Blaybaum and Sons. And here's an ad that I found in 1922 for that company. And perhaps he saw that ad too. Maybe he needed a change of occupation, or he just wanted to try something different. I have no idea, but perhaps he saw this very same ad and decided to apply. Now, one other thing that you can do, since I have a couple of addresses to deal with, his home at 319 Garfield Street and where he would have applied for this job at 450 West Philadelphia Street, I can go to Google Maps and I can see here is his home and here is where he would have applied for that job. Perhaps he worked at that same address. And the two locations are just about 3/4 of a mile apart. He could have driven, he could have walked, but at least I can tell that that particular job was in his neighborhood. And that gives me a little bit more sense of his life. So city directories and also using newspaper ads, those are wonderful ways to tell a little bit more about your ancestor's life. And don't forget, when you go to newspapers also, you can find out, of course, we look for obituaries and also marriage information. And don't always just look for the year someone got married. Here is the 50th wedding anniversary for both Frederick and his bride, Emma Welty Stabley. They were married in 1871, but they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And there was just so much wonderful information about when they got married, who married them, what her maiden name was, that her mother was still living at 92 years of age. So remember, newspapers can be a wonderful resource for all types of information. So when Frederick passed away, he had a death certificate that I found online. And unfortunately, we go back to that type of generic carpenter label for his death certificate. What I hope you take away from this video is that records don't exist in a vacuum. You can gather all sorts of information from several different record sets to tell your ancestor story, just like I did with Frederick. I used census records, city directories, and newspapers, and now I know a little bit more about what kind of carpenter and what kind of work he did. And that's really exciting that I know him a little bit better. And now it's time for you to go out and use several different record sets. Pick one, pick an ancestor that you want to start with, and use several different types of records to tell a broader picture of your ancestor's life. If this has helped you, I'd love it if you would subscribe, and I'll leave a link to the blog post that I wrote about Frederick and his occupation down below. Every week, I post practical genealogy tips to help move your family history forward.